All right, it's Wednesday, May 22nd. This is an end of the day SPY recap midweek here. Today we end up with a two down, a bit of a hammer looking bar that took out the low of the previous day, but then found some buying to give it a little bit of a two down failure look. Not quite a failure yet, but the main thing is we are still within the range that was identified yesterday. So these 4 days coming into today, I discussed how we had the high of the range right here and the low of the range down here, and the key context is, are we going to break out of that range, either up or down, or try to break out up or down and then fail? And in this case, we just stayed within the range. So that's the context in play. And in a second, I'll show you how on the 15-minute chart, we never really attempted to break out to the upside, and that meant we went to the downside, at least temporarily. And it looks like, we will wait. Market maybe for these 3 days has been waiting for NVIDIA earnings and some other earnings, and maybe it's ready to start making its next push. But whatever it is, the context is going to be now with 5 days. Do we get out of the low end of this range or the high end of this range? And given the context to the upside, maybe we've just paused for 5 days and we're building up energy for another leg higher. And there's certainly an actionable signal here to the upside. But at that point, the context would be, do you really strongly break out above those highs, which you're expecting if you're going to get a strong move out of the gates to the upside tomorrow? So we'll find that out. In terms of structure on the day, if we go to the 15-minute chart, and again, this was the range that I identified. You can look at it. You can see the highs. It's been tested like 4 different times, including today. And right out of the gates, between the pre-market range between the blue lines, you had the 15-minute bar move up, then follow through on bar 2. So there was an opportunity to buy, but you're now kind of thinking, all right, I gotta follow through and I'm expecting to hit the pre-market highs and hit the top of this range, and then I have to see if we follow through. That's going to be the key. If we can get up through there and kind of hold the midpoint of that first bar and everything else. So instead, the market decided for 1 bars and 2 bars to kind of pause, come down a little bit, hold essentially the midpoint of the first bar, then start up again. And now, you're already almost an hour and a half into trading, and you then get another red bar to the downside. So at this point, you kind of know you're, this move isn't working out. I mean, you could almost sense it immediately, but whatever. It held the first bar, tried another attempt, and to me, I would have exited the trade. And quite frankly, I did do that in a couple of trades. At that point, I was biased to the upside. I traded Meta to the upside, and I discussed how I broke even. I just missed scaling out. It ended up making another push up, and I could have, probably had a small gain, and then it came all the way back down again. But that was kind of a break-even trade for me, similar to what I think the SPY showed. And then I actually took a small loss on Apple. I was trying to buy this one on the inside bar breakout, and I had before that failure on the SPY happened, I had to take a loss on Apple, and that's why you take small losses here, because it went all the way down after that. So, I kind of knew the market was not, doing all that great, and obviously knew it was waiting for a big earnings announcement. So again, I wasn't surprised at all, when it came after this failure right here, that it came down and decided to make a push lower, take out not only the intraday low but the pre-market lows. Liquidity, even though you're kind of holding above the midpoint of the prior day, you sense that this failure here, you were going to make a move lower. And I actually, at that point, I looked around for some stocks that were to the downward, had downward structure, and I traded Netflix to the downside. And I actually here, went down early, had a little pause. I bought this secondary, push down, bought some puts here, and you can see it took out the lows of the day on push number 2. So, there was a bias to the downside, whether you played the SPY or not. Then the question is, well, what happens here? It looks like it might have taken out liquidity, and now, you're right back in the middle of everything. It doesn't necessarily mean you're coming back. You already took out the first bar low, so it's not like you have a strong, feeling that you're going to get all the way back up and take out the highs again. Anything's possible. And then it just kind of grinds up for an hour, and then it makes this big push down. Now, I'm not saying there was any way to really know this was happening. I think if I was watching it and knowing the market overall was weak, I saw other stocks weakening at the time. Once it made this red bar down right around here and looked pretty, it looked like it was going to take out this low one more time. That's all I can tell you if you were going to kind of just judge price action. And if you bought puts here just on that kind of a, just reading price action basis, then it obviously goes through 1, 2, 3, 4 bars, right down in a big way. So there was a nice little trade here, but I'm not saying it was the one you'd really want to take, in terms of just intraday structure. It's just something you kind of can tell that I was going to try to take out that low. And that's all, that's kind of what you knew as this red bar was developing. But anyway, so it makes a big push down, and where does it stop? Right at the bottom of the range we identified. So you go back to the daily chart. If you were short in any way, you almost had to know this was an area to either scale out or take profits or whatever. And it's not surprising that it had the big bounce from there. And then since NVIDIA earnings looks pretty positive, the market, is likely probably to start up tomorrow. So we're going to have to see now in the big picture, do we break out of this trading range? That's still the context one way or the other. You're kind of expecting it with 2 days to go in the week. But, if we come up and can't, and try and fail and then come back into the range, be ready to, maybe get short by the end of the week. Hard to say. But for now, with the weekly chart kind of moving up and pausing for 3 days, holding above the midpoint of the prior week, I'm expecting higher, even though I'm ready, to do anything that might develop relative to how price decides to react to this range. So that's kind of where it's at for the day. And, just kind of a big, I don't know what you'd call this. This first move down was definitely a liquidity grab. And this one here was just a shakeout, right to the bottom of a range and then pop right back up. So anyway, the trading range was the kind of the key to kind of determine that, you're not really having a sustained move one way or the other. But once it did break down, and once you saw a lot of stocks failing, it's not surprising that something crazy, would break down and then, maybe test the bottom of the range after failing to make it to the high of the range. So again, not surprising to see this is my point. Not that you could have easily, captured it. So we'll see what happens for the rest of the week. I'm expecting higher, but let's see, keep this trading range in mind as your context.